Pokémon, a craze that exploded first in 1995 in Japan and eventually the rest of the world, spawning various merchandise from a hit anime, manga, toys, and even a card game. However, a series this popular can't stay in limbo, which is why in 1997 a sequel to the ever-popular Pokemon Red, Blue, Green, and Yellow was announced, titled as Pocket Monster 2 Gold and Silver, and later shown off at the Nintendo Spaceworld 1997 event, including a playable demo. However, this demo that was shown off at the Spaceworld 1997 event was a very different Pokemon Gold and Silver game that we know of today. More or less a completely different game, with 80% of the game supposedly even done by then. But eventually, the game was more or less scrapped, and development began again to make the game that we know today. Very little was known about this demo and build, but after 21 years, in 2018, a leak of the Spaceworld 1997 demo came to light, and was quickly data mined to uncover a treasure trove of cut content, including a vastly different Pokédex featuring numerous cut and altered Pokemon. So today on Cut Content, we explore the cut and altered Pokemon of Pokemon Gold and Silver. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell too to further support us and keep creating new videos. The demo of Pokemon Gold and Silver at the Spaceworld 1997 event was a rather restrictive demo. This demo only allowed you to go around the starting town, through the first route, and to the gate that would normally enter the next town. Therefore, you only got to see a few Pokemon, but much like the final game, 100 new Pokemon were in the data of this build. A large chunk with placeholder stats of 50 in fact. As well, the order of the Pokédex, in my opinion, didn't look very finalized, since some Pokemon were in really strange spots, like having Togepi after Ho-Oh. To top this off, unlike the final game, every Pokemon's color scheme as well consisted of just one solid color, like in Generation 1. It is as such clear that this wasn't being built for the Game Boy Color in mind, like the final game was. And without further ado, we shall look over and analyze each of these Pokemon. To start it off, let's begin with the 3 starter Pokemon. Instead of Chikorita, Cyndaquil, and Totodile, you had Happa, Honoguma, and Kurusu. And yes, this will be a trend with Japanese names, since these old names were never localized. Other than Chikorita just having a different name, the other 2 were completely different Pokemon. Their evolutions also reflected this. Happa's evolution, however, still had Meganium, which was called Hanaryu back then. But the mid-evolution was a vastly different Pokemon from Bayleaf, and looking nothing like the other 2. Not a strange thing considering you had a freaking fish that becomes an octopus in the same generation. Next up, let's look at some new Pokemon that were cut altogether from the final game that aren't starters. Starting off with this line called Manbo, Ikari, and Guru Tetsu, the first form being water, and the rest being water and steel. The interesting point of these 3 is that they all may have been reworked into Pokemon in later generations, with Ikari becoming Sharpedo, Guru Tetsu becoming Huntail just one generation after considering its design, and Manbo becoming Alomomola, with even the Japanese name of Alomomola being Mamanbo, which is similar to Manbo. Next are Dark types, Rinrin and Birurun, a set of cat Pokemon carrying bells, as well as these ice types, Urufuman and Wafurufu, a set of Pokemon wearing wolf-like coats, a lot like Mimikyu later in Generation 7. Then we have the return of Kotora and Raitora, both of which also appeared among the cut Pokemon of Generation 1. This time, however, they are missing their 3rd form. Now we have some nightmare fuel in the form of ghost types, Norawara and Kyopan. As a child, I thought the attack curse was already creepy with a needle being stuck into themselves. Might be obvious why this was cut. A really neat one is Bomo Shika, which is a fusion of water and fire type, which is also a good 4 generations before the legendary Volcanion that did just that. And now we have the interesting specimen that is Tobin, which is, by its name, clearly a play on the word turban by its shape in this case. This does look a lot like the shell of Slowbro and Slowking. I imagine the Pokédex entry would have mentioned that it fell off Slowbro and Slowking after and lived on independently. As well, it has no ties to the Shelter or Cloyster line's evolutionary lines here either. Now a very bizarre one is Sunizu, which is actually a pre-evolution, the first form of Girafarig. And yes, like its pre-evolution, Girafarig looked very different here. Now while there are a few others to look at like legendaries, evolutions, and baby Pokemon, we'll loop back to those in a bit. Instead, we'll first go right into the category of altered Pokemon. Existing final Pokemon that had designs as different as only slightly to absolutely what were they thinking category. Now the rather simple one includes the Mareep line, which while the latter two look the same, Mareep here was also pink like Flaffy. As well, we had the Natu line that was just simply brown instead. We also had a yellow Espeon, which interestingly evolved via a cut Heartstone item, while its counterpart Espeon that looked the same evolved with the cut Poison Stone, as it was poison type back then. Now the Phanpy line also didn't look too different, with Phanpy only looking slightly off and Donphan being brown instead. Now entering the bigger differences are ones that include Ladybug and Hoothoot's line, where Ladybug and Hoothoot looked very similar to their final counterparts, but their evolutions looked vastly different. Fun fact, the Ladybug line is called the 5-star Pokemon, even though they don't seem to have anything to do with stars, but it seems it was a carryover from Ledian's original form having stars on its shell. Now a number of baby Pokemon from the original had different designs, including Smoochum, Elekid, and Magmy. Magmy was only slightly off, but the other two are vastly different, with Smoochum looking actually like a smaller Jinx, and Elekid being basically a light bulb. Igglybuff and Cleffa also had slight differences. Igglybuff missing its top part of its head, and Cleffa with its ears not being brown, which looks rather jarring if you do ask me, and had an antenna on its head instead. And Pichu was wildly different here, looking almost like a circle with ears, more mouse-like here in fact. Now then, some of the new evolutions from the final game also look rather different here. Scizor just being green like Scyther, Blissey having its literal heart on its head, Blossom having a black body like Vileplume did in its original pixel art, Politoed which looked way more toad-like here, but with swirls much like its others in its family, and Kingdra which actually had arms that was way more dragon-like. And then there is the absolute oddity that is Porygon 2, which was something else entirely. I guess they want to change the animal it was? Instead of being a duck, they went with a bear? I guess Porygon Z would have instead been a squid of sorts if this trend kept up. Now, before we move forward, we need to mention one more leak that happened, known as the Spaceworld 1999 build. This was a whole 2 years after this one that was mentioned earlier, and the build is much more similar to the final games with no cut Pokemon in it. But there are still a lot of designs that differ greatly from the final games. And with that, continuing with the altered designs, we'll begin with one of my favorite finds, the beta form of the Wooper line. Wooper here is from the 1999 build, and is a 4-legged creature here instead, and honestly a real shame that this wasn't what we got instead of the final version in my opinion. Now Quagsire is interesting. It was in the 1997 build, but Wooper wasn't there, meaning Quagsire was in fact a one-stage Pokemon at that point. Now we are on to the Meryl line. The 97 form of Meryl was pink. If back then we had seen this instead of Pika Blue over here, we probably would have called it Pikachu or something. Now, Azurill doesn't become a thing until the 1999 build, meaning Meryl was also a one-stage Pokemon in 97. Azurill here looks only slightly different from Meryl, who was now the traditional blue color that it normally is in 1999 build, sporting a gold color. Now the fish Remoraid wasn't changed in either version, but I'm sure you're more interested in seeing its wacky evolution Octillery, where the name made a whole lot more sense back then. Both its 97 and 1999 version were vastly different, the 97 version looking more like an octopus and a tank merged, while the 1999 version was the same but without a helmet, appropriately called Aku Tank in Japan, being a merger of octopus and tank, which stayed in the final version too, despite the final version not having any of its tank features, and the English version just adapted the name with octopus and artillery. The name clearly was of least concern, but remember Pichu from earlier and its 97 version? Well, it had a unique 1999 version too. The gold 1999 builds had the final game's version, but the silver 1999 build had one that looked somewhere in between the two. Now, from one baby Pokemon to another, we move on to the Tyrogue line, the branch that only leads to Hitmontop in this case. Looking the same in both versions, the designs are drastically different from the final games. Hitmontop featured 3 legs and 3 eyes. A nightmare fuel on its own. Tyrogue was more rounded out and with a more bear-like design, but clearly made like its final version to look like a more childish fighter. Now on to the Hoppip line. Hoppip and Skiploom definitely look familiar but different. Both sporting a much bigger tail in the 97 build, no limbs, and different coloring. Now Jumpluff is one that looked very different, looking more like a natural evolution to them in 97. But in 99, we got the Jumpluff that we know today, but it had 2 extra puffballs compared to the final games. The Larvitar line isn't too different except for Larvitar itself, looking like some cocky kid with his tongue out, totally naked next to the final incarnation at that. No tail or nothing. Possibly just unfinished here, of course. The Chinchou line itself was also not too different in 1999, with Chinchou's eyes not having its yellow outline, and Lantern looking chubbier. Now the cut Pokemon Tetsu that I mentioned earlier may have also been the 97 version of Lantern, considering the piece on its head perfectly matches Lantern's. The Sunkern line had a very different Sunkern in 1999, looking more seed-like here, which was fitting since it does become Sunflora later on. Sunflora did also exist in the 97 build, but was just a one-stage Pokemon, no Sunkern. Pinecone itself looks the same, but Fortress definitely had a change, looking more like the insides of the final Fortress, but without its cannons. Now, remember the pre-evolution of Girafarig, Sunizu, that I mentioned earlier? Well, in 1999, Girafarig was down to having only one head, but Sunizu continued to exist as its pre-evolution, now being this weird white blob thingy. Now the question is, why do I have a new Pokemon in the altered section? Well, that's because this Pokemon may have in fact become Wobbuffet. A theory that goes around is that Sunizu is not only in the exact place that Wobbuffet is in the Pokedex, but if you turn Sunizu upside down, it perfectly matches the outline of Wobbuffet's back sprite, which may indicate that they evolved this design into that. Also, they're both Psychic type. Now, Slugma, Spinarak, and the Central line are quite similar. Slugma just lacked the fire shapes over its head, and Magcargo was missing the flame that came out of its shell. Ferret is missing its stripes and had a different tail. Ariados had a more threatening face design on its back, but in 1999, it was made less threatening. Now, Mantine had quite a change. In 97, it looked almost like an entirely different beast. Kind of bird-like, but still was actually a sea creature. And by 1999, it was practically screaming because it was stuck in a demo build. Now Shuckle, Delibird, and Murkrow had minor differences. Shuckle had smaller legs and shell, and Delibird had no presents, but instead its present bag was its tail here. See, it's holding nothing! It's attached to its back. Murkrow had a witch hat on here, which was fitting considering crows and witches are a common theme together, before it became a generic crow here. Dunsparce looked very different in 1999. While the species is based off the Japanese creature Yosutsuchinoko, the 1999 build definitely resembled it more. It also lacked the wings the final version has. The next two are a little odd. These are the beta versions of Aipom and Sneasel. Both look very different in 97. Aipom almost looked cat-like here, and Sneasel definitely looked a lot more like a real weasel, with its 1999 version still looking like one too. The odd part is their place in the Pokedex in the 97 build. It has Sneasel in between both Suicune and Ho-Oh, and Aipom a few entries after Ho-Oh. Some think these may have been more mythical, legendary Pokemon back then, especially since they were one-stage Pokemon. A plausible theory, but as mentioned earlier, we also have Pokemon like Togepi and Snubbull after Ho-Oh. Were these also legendaries then? Did Misty literally almost own a legendary? Personally, I think it's just that the dex placement was more an afterthought back then and not finalized, and would have been rearranged later on. I mean, the last Pokemon in dex entry is literally Leafeon. Wait, Leafeon? Yep, Leafeon, the cut evolution of Eevee back in Generation 2, which brings us to the cut evolutions. Now, there are a surprising number of cut evolutions in this game that were later reintroduced and reimagined. Leafeon being one of them, which came later on Generation 4, but with a very different design. This one looked far leafier and even has roots at the bottom of its leg. Another is Licky Licky, the evolution of Lickitung, 2 generations early, also looking very different from his Gen 4 design. Looking more like Lickitung here, but with an even longer tongue here, body patterns, and whiskers. Now, one I absolutely wish wasn't cut is Madame. Madame is Farfetch'd's evolution, many generations before Surfetch'd was introduced. Honestly, I can see Madame as a split evolution here. Surfetch'd being the male evolution, while Madame being the female one. Or just a non-Galar form if they want to go that route if she was ever reintroduced. Do it, Game Freak! The only similarity is that the wing is kind of like a shield here, and his leak is kind of like a sword as well, so it may have inspired Surfetch'd in a way. Now here are 4 that we never got. An evolution to Pinsir called Purakusu, which the evolution has a horn that does make me theorize that Heracross eventually just replaced this. An evolution to Ditto called Animon. It is normal type in the demo, but evolved using a metal coat, and still only knows Transform. It's possible that this wasn't complete yet, but also may have been removed for them not knowing what to do with it unless they were to make it far removed from Ditto. Quillfish, which is this one-stage Pokemon, had an evolution called Shibire Fugu, basically a bigger Quillfish. It's still a water type, but has a clear thunder symbol on its face. Maybe like Animon, it was also unfinished? Now a cut split evolution to Weepinbell exists called Subomito, which would evolve with the cut Poison Stone item. Kinda made sense to exist considering the way Bellsprout and the Oddish line had similarities in their growth. Lastly is Tangrowth, which was 2 generations early of a Tangle evolution, looking very different. Can't see its face and is a bit more wild in appearance. But wait, the Tangle line doesn't just get an evolution, it also has a baby form too in 97 called Manja, bringing us to the cut baby Pokemon. Now Manja, definitely being tiny like the other baby Pokemon, had its tangles more as a hairstyle here before it lost control of its life. Now 3 pre-evolutions were cut as well from the first generation that were set to make a comeback here, including pre-evolutions of Ponyta, Meowth, and Goldeen. Ultimately cut once again. Now we instead had 4 new ones that were set to be introduced, including a Dodo one called Hinazu, which had 3 heads despite it going down to being 2 again when it evolved, only to go back to 3 when it evolved again. Paris, Growlithe, and Grimer being the other 3 additions that were ultimately cut. The last one is Bararina, which is likely supposed to be pronounced as Ballerina, the pre-evolution of Mr. Mime. 2 generations before Mime Jr., which had a radically different appearance. Still a performer here by being a dancer, and not a mime like Mime Jr. is. As well, a pre-evolution to Vulpix called Mycon. While Ninetales has 9 tails, and Vulpix has 6, this one only has 3 tails, a fitting baby Pokemon. Now rounding it out, let's go on to the legendaries. Pokemon like Ho and Lugia always look the same, but legendary beasts were radically different beasts. Definitely resembling dogs far more here than the final game's debated idea of if they are dogs or cats. As well, they resemble their typing far more here, with Raikou having sharp yellow fur, Entei with literally fiery fur, and Suicune, I guess, having hair as if it just came out of a shower. Good designs, but in my opinion, they didn't really have a strong appearance of a legendary like the final games does, which may be why they were redesigned to look more grand. The last one is Celebi here. It has seen things in 1999, looking way past its expiration date, but by the final game, it had a lot more life to it, going full green. And there was another leak that presented us with even more sets of sprites for cut Pokemon, featuring ones that were even more out of this world. This leak is actually a newer leak from April 2020. What we got out of it were 5 banks of sprites and 1 designer's scratchpad. To keep it brief, the sprite banks hold an index of the sprites that were in that point of development, the earliest one being from May 6, 1998. However, despite the dates, some are clearly left over from earlier in development. The scratchpad, however, is more a record kept by the artist that included in the latest sprites and the earlier ones from development next to them. Therefore, combined, we can get a very thorough picture of how the Pokemon may have changed, evolved, or were plain cut. Therefore, starting where we stopped last time, we showed a version of Celebi from the 1999 build that looked familiar but quite different. From these leaks, we have found an even older version, potentially from 1996 even. a very shadowy figure based on southwestern Native American mythology called the Kokopelli. The evolution of this design looks rather clear, and even though it might have been made prior to the 97 demo, it would mean that it was dropped for a bit before being remade and brought back for the Spaceworld 1999 build. Continuing with legendaries, we now got what some theorized was going to be the original silver box legendary here. Based on statues found in the Shinto shrines called the Shishi, which are lion-dog hybrids, it has a very grand appearance like a legendary. As well, it is very close to Ho in the sprite index numbering, and would have fit very well with the 3 legendary dogs too, especially their beta designs being rather matching to this one. So the lore very well could have been that this was their master, while the legendary birds were led by Ho-Oh, so box legendary status isn't such an impossible one for this one. Now let's look at Pokemon that are in the final game but have new beta designs discovered. First up is our starter Cyndaquil. This version of Cyndaquil has a rather different back. Its flames aren't there, and instead it has these spikes. A theory is that it's an ice type due to the beta name being Igaru or Igloo. But these spikes are green however, so these can't be icicles, so thus the typing is hard to confirm here. However, without the signature flame, Cyndaquil may indeed not have been a fire type, especially since someone else had the fire starter spot at that time. In the previous video, we saw that there was a pink Meryl and a gold Azumarill in the 97 and 99 build. However, there is one more beta sprite to that gold Azumarill, which depicts it with 2 tails instead, a different stomach pattern, and conjoined ears. So now we have an even earlier version of Politoed. The last one already was jarringly different, but this one is from even further back. It's still clear that it is still part of the Poliwag lines thanks to the swirls on its stomach. But this design also does solve a major question from back in Generation 1. Originally in the Generation 1 leaks, there was a pair of Pokemon with top knots. We only had their back sprites, so we had no idea what they looked like from the front. However, if you look at the back sprite of this Politoed, it has a top knot too, and definitely resembles the first form of this Generation 1 top knot pair. If this theory is true, it likely would mean that Politoed may have even existed back during Generation 1's development, but was its own separate line altogether since it had its own evolution too. Now on to the next one, which isn't much since there isn't much to say about Quagsire considering it was already covered in the last video, but there was this one other sprite found that depicted it in purple actually. Now going on to the Hoppip line, which was also discovered last time, there is some earlier versions found of it actually. 2 new versions actually of Hoppip that appeared between both the demos. This one is a clear transition of its body between the Spaceworld 97 and 99 build, with the body of the 97 build and the face of the 99. The second being the final version, but in green. Its evolution Skiploom had one additional one too, in between the builds. This had the final body, but in brown, but still has its long tail from its older sprite. And finally its evolution Jumpluff, which had one more sprite in between too. This one is a clear transition in appearance too, that has the ears of 97, much of the body of 99, and one fluff piece on the top too. Hoot Hoot, being another covered from last time, had an additional older design too from prior to the 97 build. This one looked even more owl-like in appearance, with a much thicker eyebrow to boot, and wings either not being there or tucked in completely. So this is an interesting one. Not only do we have a beta Elekid here from the last time, but there's also a final Elekid here too. Considering they are right next to each other in the same sprite bank, they were designed at roughly the same time possibly. As such, it is possible that the idea was to make Beta Elekid, the baby form, and Final Elekid, the mid-stage evolution, with Electabuzz now as the third in this lineup. Now Wobbuffet was another Pokemon that we discussed last time that may have evolved out of the 99 demo design for Giraffurig's pre-evolution. There is, however, one other design that seems to have been associated with Wobbuffet that looks somewhat like a gelatinous ghost. It's hard to say if this is the front or back sprite of it, but the fold here does look a lot like the fold on Wobbuffet's back, so this design may have been the first step from the original design to Wobbuffet as such. However, there is also one more design for the Giraffurig pre-evolution too, which has the conjoined heads now separated here and in a better color palette. Now I did last time show you guys the Remoraid line and how different Octillery was. but I did quickly gloss over Remoraid as it looked rather similar from the front. We'll now take a closer look from the back sprite, where it looks quite different actually. Fitting in well with Auxiliary's tank design, Remoraid was clearly designed as a gunfish hybrid. Now in relation, I last time showed Mantine, which included a version of it from the 99 build that was screaming into the void. This time there's one other sprite, which is instead grinning. It also has 2 regular torpedoes here too, instead of the usual Remoraid torpedoes. Now Gligar has a very creepy early version to it, where it looked far more bat-like, and its arms and legs were smaller to match its middle joint. We last time also looked at Beta Dunsparce from the 99 demo, but it seems there is one other design for it that may be even older here. While the similarities are obvious, it was a lot more snake-like here. The only other snake in the beta is the smaller one that we'll plan to look at later. However, there is no real evidence to say if these two are connected. We also last time saw a very different looking Sneasel that looked much closer to a real weasel. We have one more design of him actually that was in between the 99 demo and the final game. This one has the same pose as the beta design, but dark like the final one, a big grin, and kinda looks like Shadow the Hedgehog here. And to finish this category, let's look at Blissey again. Last time we had a beta Blissey that had its literal heart on its head. However, there seems to be an in-between version too that depicts a taller Blissey wearing an apron and these pipe things coming from its side, while sporting Chansey's shiny color too. Now before we look at the newly discovered cut Pokemon, let's quickly look at the cut Pokemon from last time that got further new beta sprites, elements, and even evolutions added to them. First up, let's look at the original Fire Starter that was based on this line of bears. One interesting fact that has been discovered since is that the original Fire Starter became Teddiursa. An early sprite of Teddiursa was found where it looks similar to the final one, except without its mouth being white, having a tail, and not having the moon symbol on its head. However, it's an exact match for its body shape and pose with the Fire Starter. A clear transition into becoming a regular bear. Ursary, however, didn't have the luxury of ever being a starter. Next is this long snake-like creature that appears to be a completely new Pokemon. However, why is it in this section? Considering the snake-like body, the next entry in this index is Grutessu from the last video. Because of the shape and coming directly before it, it is possible that this was the original pre-evolution to it before they changed their evolutionary line in the 97 build. This definitely is a lot more fitting too. However, the 97 pre-evolution still did exist here. At this point, it might have just been a regular one-stage evolution, and may even have been influenced from the shark that was cut from the Generation 1 Pokemon that was also a one-stage Pokemon. However, the 97 pre-evolution to that is still here too, and even proves that it is indeed separate from these two Pokemon, as it has its own evolutionary line altogether here, looking actually like a natural evolution as opposed to the 97 demo, which looked rather all over the place, with its headpiece becoming a horn, and then an even bigger horn by stage 3. While I have been calling it Manbo the whole time, its actual name was Manbo 1. It never made sense why it had a 1 in the demo, but here it would make sense if its evolutions were called Manbo 2 and Manbo 3. Now last time I showed an evolution to Quillfish known as Shibire Fugu. Here we have what is believed to be an earlier version of it, and the resemblance is definitely there, with the larger lips and fins on its head. On the flip side, it is possible that this was also an earlier Quillfish that became Shibire Fugu, considering the dual color is the same on both. Now last time we also looked at a baby form of Growlithe. Here however, we have what looks to be an even earlier form of that, which has an odd horn that none of the evolutions have. However, Growlithe in Pokemon Legends Arceus does have a horn, so this may have actually influenced that design. Now here we are at the last big category of cut Pokemon that were not seen at all in the last video, and discovered only via this leak. First, let's begin with a Generation 1 tradition, a cut mid-evolution to the Natu line, featuring what is more of a peacock-looking design here actually. I mean, going from Natu to Xatu always looked like it was going from child to elder real quick. This looks like a reasonable adult form. And yes, both Natu and Xatu are present in the same index, so this wouldn't be a beta form of either of them. Now what we have is an evolutionary line of bird Pokemon based on music. The first being this chicklet that may be a quail, with what appears to be a quarter note on its head, while its evolution has its whole body shaped as a G-clef. The resemblance between this bird and Chatot in Generation 4 is pretty noticeable, with how they both carry a quarter note on their head to a degree. So it's quite possible that this was remade for them. Now this is a very strange looking bird Pokemon based on a cockatoo, but has a megaphone as its mouth. We already explored a pair of music-based Pokemon. Could this have been related to those through either an evolution or even a split evolution? And here we have a Kiwi-based Pokemon and a Scorpion Pokemon. Rather simple designs, very much resembling their real-life counterparts. It's possible that this Scorpion even became Skorupi in Generation 4, or just became Gligar later in development. Next is the Stork Pokemon. This would have been the second bird Pokemon in that generation to make deliveries other than Delibird, if this made it in. This one instead delivering baby Pokemon. Might have even been the original intended way to get baby Pokemon before the breeding mechanic was implemented. Now what we have here is an evolutionary line that is basically Kirby and its evolutions, becoming a bunny and then locks and locks of hair. The bunny ears in the mid-evolution do appear to look like leaves, however, which is actually based on snow bunnies that people make in Japan using leaves for their ears. As such, it may have been a combination of ice and grass type. However, what may be connected to these is this version which looks like it was a split evolution. One that looks like a pear, the other looking kinda tree-like with roots. Now, it is also very possible that this would have been the fourth in this evolutionary line, which would have been the first in the series if done. Following the rabbit theme, this may have been yet another Pikachu clone that was planned, having rather bunny-like ears and overall rather cute. Next up is this Pokemon with massive ears. Seems to be yet another sort of bunny Pokemon due to the legs and ears, but may simply have been an exaggeration. As well, it also looks eerily similar to the character Elfilin from Kirby and the Forgotten Land. It's hard to say why this is the case. It's possible that this is just a coincidence. It's also possible that this was just thought of by looking at this very leak, since this leak came out just 2 years prior, or it's possible that they just shared designs between each other since they have a tie between themselves through Nintendo. Otherwise, it's up in the air why they look so similar. Next, we have a Firefox here, a good 4 generations earlier than Fennekin. It's possible that this Pokemon eventually was revamped into it. The resemblance is uncanny. Now, we have another fox here that is shaped like a windsock and a squid with drills, a scarecrow Pokemon, potentially the big rival to Murkrow, a plant Pokemon with one eye that may have even become the happier Sunflora later on, and a gargoyle Pokemon. Not much more to say about these Pokemon here, but the gargoyle Pokemon has a rather similar appearance to an Aerodactyl. Whether there was a connection is hard to say, but it is possible that it was shelved due to looking too similar. Now this is a rather cute ghost Pokemon. It's based on a common cartoony Japanese design of ghosts, with the white headpiece that was traditionally used in Japan to dress dead bodies before burial, and 2 wisps of fire following it. Its stance, however, does look very much like the generic ghost seen in the Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town. However, in contrast, it isn't very scary. Welcome to Ninja Squirrel Country. This is actually a very well put together design, a flying squirrel that could glide in ninja manner and shaped like a shuriken. Maybe they felt this was a little over-designed and thus why we got a generic squirrel like Sentret in the end? Now the next one is the small snake Pokemon. I mentioned it earlier as a pre-evolution to the beta Dunsparce, as its appearance looks as if it would evolve into something, since it's very small and childlike and there are no other snake-like creatures in this index. Next is a koala and a tanuki Pokemon. The koala looking a lot like Komala from Generation 6, which may have been reinvented for it. Also, I'm very surprised we didn't get a Tanuki in later generations either. Those turn out a lot in a number of series, and Pokemon would have been the perfect series for it. The next 2 are frog Pokemon with horns and an odd hybrid between a hippo and a warthog. The frog is pretty generic, which may be why it was cut. The hybrid one, however, seems to have some sort of punk theme to it, down to the mohawk and the dark pants. Now we have a boar-looking Pokemon with antlers, a rather generic design, but it's possible this eventually became Piloswine for all we know. We now got an elephant Pokemon. It does kind of look like the cut elephant from the Generation 1 games, especially its back sprite. Now, the next two are a giant fly Pokemon that kind of resembles Yanma or even Yanmega, and this armored fly Pokemon, which may actually be the evolution to it considering their similarities of their head and wings. Now we have this pair of bug Pokemon, one being a bagworm looking Pokemon and a moth Pokemon. This evolutionary line might be what influenced Burmy and Mothim from Generation 4, with some clear similarities between them. And then there is this fish-looking Pokemon with 5 fins. Its design looks somewhat like Cherrim. Despite being a different species, it may have in fact inspired Cherrim later on. Now another oddity is this fish-bird hybrid. There is a species of fish that are called flying fish that have really large fins here that look like wings, and this could somewhat be based on that. But the wings here are definitely more bird-like, however. Now on to fossil Pokemon of this generation, which at the time may have had one that looked very much like Cranidos from Generation 4, and may in fact have went on to become just that. The other fossil Pokemon that we may have gotten that generation is one that looks kind of like an Ankylosaurus due to its tail, and considering the tail, it may have in fact been the evolution to that Proto-Crandios. Now this one is a real neat one, a Plesiosaur Pokemon that is also a Viking ship. Hard to say if this would have been a fossil or not, but Viking ships back then did tend to have a headpiece that sometimes resembled a dragon head too, so the inspiration may have been clear here. There are some theories about whether this connects to other Pokemon, whether it be an evolution to Lapras or even the beta form of Lugia. Despite some resemblances, Lugia's wouldn't be correct, as Lugia was made originally for the Pokemon 2000 movie as an anime-only Pokemon, but then was implemented into the game. The Lapras evolution is a possibility considering they both are Pokemon you'd obviously ride, and both are Plesiosaurs. Either that, or this might have been just its own Pokemon, and possibly removed for being redundant since Lapras exists. Now to end things off, let's look at today's Nightmare Fuel, a full-on skeletal Pokemon. We have seen Pokemon depicted as skeletons before at the Pokemon Museum, for example, but here we have a full living skeleton as a usable Pokemon. It does also bear somewhat of a resemblance to a Xenomorph from the Alien series. And so after a number of major leaks, we have what may be a large collection of cut and altered Pokemon from Generation 2, which easily outdid what was discovered for Generation 1. While a ridiculous amount were cut and drastically altered, many didn't stay dead, as some did make a grand return in later generations. Some I wish would return, but ultimately, the final Pokédex we got in Generation 2's 100 new Pokemon was excellent as it was, and led to the creation of one of the best Pokemon games to date, if not the very best. It's unknown if there are still some that may be cut or altered, but if they are discovered, and together with other cut elements of Generation 2, including maps, character, and story, I'll definitely plan to cover it. So hit the subscribe button, for I'll plan to be back with more Pokemon and other games cut content too. Hit the like button and comment below on which of these cut and original designs did you enjoy the most. So everyone, thank you for watching!